Sable as we use it today is usually in reference to either a fur or a shade of black associated with that fur. So when the Christmas Carol Santa Baby says slip the sable under the tree, it's speaking about this fur, whether it be a stole, coat, muff, or anything else. The fur comes from a small weasel-like animal of the same name, a member of the marten family that is indigenous to northern Asia and parts of Russia. And interestingly, trading in these and other exotic furs was the basis for the eastward expansion and subsequent colonization of what would eventually become a unified Russia. But initially, there were no such grand plans. The first dawnings of what would be the Russian Empire came in the form of a Viking invasion into Europe's Baltic region. Though not exactly peaceful, these Gotlander Vikings from the Isle of Gotland in Sweden are considered to be far less ruthless than the Vikings who invaded Western Europe, and actually they ended up assimilating into the culture of the Baltic people quite well, over time even foregoing much of their own cultural heritage. But there are still fingerprints of this ancestry that can be found in the region. Not least of all is the name Russia, which owes its etymology to these Vikings, referred to variously as Gotlanders, Varangians, and Rus. It has been posited that the name Rus is related to the Finnish word for Sweden, Ruasti, from Old Norse Rotherslandi, meaning the land of rowing, this coming from another Old Norse word, Rother, which means steering oar, as the Gotlanders were a seafaring people. Not content with stagnation, the Rus pushed their boundaries outward to the east and south, establishing a loose collection of principalities known as Kievan Rus, which stretched throughout modern-day Eastern Russia, Poland, Ukraine, and Belarus, among others. This collection was crowned by the acquisition of the city of Kiev, which became the capital of this historical state, owing to its advantageous position along the Dnieper River. Yet this expansion of territory wasn't necessarily about amassing power. In fact, the principalities within Kievan Rus were hardly united, though they were generally each ruled by members of the same family, the Rurikids, who would go on to be Russia's founding dynasty. Instead, the primary objective of expansion had far more to do with trade. They broadened their reach by setting up fortified trade outposts, recruiting locals and new settlers to set up shop before moving on to the next. Where they did not colonize, they established trade routes, allowing them to engage in commerce with far-off places like Constantinople and Baghdad, as well as using their homeland of Gotland as an intermediary between Kievan Rus and Western Europe. They often traded their own goods for things like silk, spices, jewelry, and books, and especially silver coins from the Arabic world as well as Western Europe, which the Rus incorporated with their own circulating currency. The silver was of special interest due to the meager natural deposits within their own territory, but what Kievan Rus lacked in precious metals, they made up for in soft gold. In the Book of Precious Treasures, written by the Arab author Ibn Rusta sometime in the 930s, he notes that the Rus had no villages, no cultivated fields. Their only occupation is trading in sable and squirrel and other kinds of skins. The fur trade was prosperous for the region and absolutely integral to the economy of Kievan Rus. They commonly dealt in pelts of squirrel, beaver, fox, sea otter, and ermine. But what they became best known for, the real soft gold, was sable. Sable even prompted the Rus to push farther eastward, leading to the colonization of Siberia as the most prized breed, known as Bargusian sables with the darkest and most luxurious pelts, came from the area surrounding the region's Lake Baikal. But initially, sable was not exclusively used for foreign trade. It was actually far more intertwined with the Rus economy than that. You see, since the territories of Kievan Rus didn't really have much in the way of natural deposits of precious metals, they turned to animal pelts as a form of currency, specifically those of sables and squirrels. In fact, we have records from the turn of the first millennium explaining the value of these pelts, including their worth relative to silver and how they factored into the currency of the state. The largest denomination was called grivna, which was indicative of a weight of silver about 204 grams in the north and 163 grams in the south, respectively determined by Carolingian or Byzantine metrics. But grivna itself was not necessarily indicative of silver, rather something that was of equal value to a grivna of silver. For example, In a document detailing the purchase of land, there is mention of a grivna of kuna. Kuna means marten or sable. So the unit of measurement indicates that there were enough sable pelts to match the value of a grivna in silver, about 25 pelts. The smallest monetary unit was a veksha, which comes from the Old Slavic word for squirrel. A veksha was not necessarily indicative of trading with a literal pelt, though they were known to do so, but more akin to the nominal amount of silver the pelt would be worth. And while this form of currency feels very antiquated in modern times, we can still find traces of it if we know where to look. From 1994 to the adoption of the euro in January of 2023, Croatia's national currency was the kuna, derived directly from this bartering system, and additionally the Ukrainian currency, hryvnia, also happens to be a descendant of grivna. But the longevity of furs as currency became a problem over time as they naturally began to deteriorate, prompting the introduction of fur-based banknotes. Sable itself was phased out as a form of currency as it had become a highly sought-after luxury for those of means and especially royalty abroad in both the East as well as the West. In fact, by the 13th century, sable had gained a foothold in Western Europe, being highly prized for its silky texture and rich dark color. Sable became a hallmark of lavishness, adorning the opulent dress of royals and aristocracy, rebranding the very image of black from the devil's color to the color of luxury. Its name entered the European lexicon, retaining its Slavic heritage, as it initially simply referred to the animal and its pelt, not the actual color black, which each country already had a term for. However, over time, sable and its related words began to be used in more stylistic literary language, being adopted to render color, describe luxurious black woolen or silk textiles, and it also became widely used in the heraldic language of the French as a term for black in place of their own word, noir. And sable was a fairly common color seen in heraldry, being featured in about 1 in 5 designs, including that of the Holy Roman Empire, which presents an imposing black eagle on a background of gold. The language of heraldry went on to heavily influence that of chivalric literature and works of Arthurian romance. In these stories, coats of arms played a great deal of importance when identifying characters, as knights tended to be fully covered by armor, including a helmet which would obscure their face, and these heraldic symbols were used to convey to the audience the role that each character played within the story. Green was young and audacious, white was wizened and good, red was an adversary, hostile or potentially evil. But black knights, those with coats of arms in sable plan like Tristan or Lancelot, were almost always characters of great importance. Though black was used to add an element of mystery to their characters, oftentimes they ultimately were revealed as valorous and heroic, further popularizing the color. But sable was not always used in such favorable characterizations. Accounts from the 19th to 20th centuries see it in use referencing someone with dark skin, and although there have been writings that simply use the word as a neutral descriptor, there are also excerpts that show it utilized in more of a mocking manner, which portrayed disrespect and the unfortunate reality of racial inequality in Western civilization. It has been suggested that originally the French used the word sabeline in reference to the actual pelts, derived directly from the Latin sabelinum, with the suffix indicating that the word is in reference to a singular pelt, which was thought of as being gender neutral, with the working part of the word sabelin being an import of Slavic origins. And we can find other forms of this same word in Germanic languages, like Middle Dutch's Sabel and Middle High German's Zobel, which are very similar to that of Slavic languages like the Russian Sobol and the Polish Sobul. But ultimately, that is where our reliable etymology stops. There have been suggestions that the origins can be traced back to an East Asiatic language, but nothing has ever been confirmed, so this one will likely remain a mystery. Before we end this episode, there is one more mystery involving sable that I'd like to share with you. The fur of sables was used to trim the golden crowns worn by Kievan princes through to the Tsars of Russia, including Russia's first official crown czar, Ivan the Terrible, who was coronated with the mysterious Cap of Monomakh, a golden headdress of dubious origins. You see, in the mid-14th century, while the Rus were under the control of the Mongols, Ivan I, Prince of Moscow and Grand Prince of Vladimir, listed down in his will that upon his death his clothes should be passed on to his eldest son, Simeon. This included such fineries as a red pearl jacket and a golden cap. And this golden cap was continually mentioned in the wills of Rus rulers throughout the 14th and 15th centuries, and additionally, it was used as the coronation crown through the late 1600s. This crown has come to be referred to as the Cap of Monomakh, a name that first began to appear in the latter half of the 15th century, a tumultuous time in the Baltics and Western Asia. The Russian lands had finally regained their independence after defeating the Mongol Tatars that had been overlords to the Kievan Rus princes for a little over 2 centuries. Ivan III, the Grand Prince of Moscow, was concluding a process known as the Gathering of Russian Lands, where the far-flung principalities that comprised Kievan Rus were formally collected and solidified as one under the crown of Russia. The Cap of Monomakh was made into a symbol not only of the unity of the kingdom, but to convey Ivan's ancestral house of Rurik as the rightful rulers. You see, an account was written indicating that in the 12th century, this Cap of Monomakh was a gift for the Grand Prince of Kiev, Vladimir II, from his grandfather Constantine IX, Monomachos of Constantinople. This story not only indicated that the House of Rurik was of royal lineage, but also bolstered their connection with the Church, and implied that they were the next great empire, like Byzantium and Rome before them. The crown became mythologized in Russian history, with Vladimir Putin even receiving a replica of the cap for his 50th birthday in 2002. However, despite centuries of grandiose myth, now it is more commonly believed that the story was used as a piece of propaganda in order to bolster the credibility of the Rurikid dynasty. In actuality, based on the craftsmanship and artistic motifs, it is now widely believed that the cap is of Mongol origins, specifically of the late 13th to early 14th centuries, which aligns not only with the Mongol rule over Kievan Rus, but also with when it was originally mentioned by Ivan I in the year 1328. In the 16th century, a cross was added to the top of the crown and a dark sable fur around the rim, adding to its symbolism and opulence to reinforce the new narrative of Russia's ruling family. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration of the word sable. Please leave a like if you would like to hear more episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment if there are any other words you would like to see covered in the future.